Hello. Hello, everyone. Welcome. As is tradition, doing a mic check. Can you guys hear Christophorus? Can I see any life in the chat? Mic check. Okay, Mr. Audit says we're good. And
Okay.
with us is Aster.
Mic check. Can everybody hear me as well? Mic check. Anybody?
Check two. Okay,
Oh,
we're good.
we're good to
Uh,
go.
so I just want to say, happy Saturnalia. I guess I'm the roadie. Yep, Mr. Audit, you're the roadie. We're seems people are either off for the holidays or they're watching Tranquil Hill Farms and his crazy stream. But I'm very excited with what I'd like to share with you guys today. And yeah, so Aster, how you've been doing?
Pretty good. I'm traveling, so I haven't really been very checked in the last few days. But Exto has shared with me the project he's been working on, and it's some great stuff. So I'm really uh, excited to basically uh, you know get to see it with you guys, and I'll chip in few thoughts. But really, this week's episode is entirely Exto's show, so I'm just here riding along.
Yep. Uh, so we kind of started this journey in this cycle a long way back with our good friend Durden. And we were originally going through uh, eras, and we were talking. This is a slide from when we had our first era tournament uh, show, where we're talking about the historical environments seem to be much different, uh, and they're much different. Perfect Team 23 and Perfect Team 22. Dead Ball was like slow pitch, and 23 Dead Ball is more dead. And I shared this graph or this chart um, that yeah, listed, runs per game, hits per plate appearances, doubles, triples, home runs, and I think some of you have used this as a guide. Um,
So this was actual MLB data, right?
I think this was something that I saw somewhere.
I think Max Fire might have originally, posted this to Discord a few years ago, with regard to era-based tournaments, and then everybody cracked up because it didn't even remotely match what we were getting in PT tournaments in 21 and 22, where they were almost flipped. Um, but I think this looks pretty close to what the eras were like in actual baseball.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. And so I think like when we showed this, it was kind of a does this make sense type of thing, and I think the consensus was that it didn't make sense because PT and real life are two wildly different animals, I would say.
Uh,
Um,
yeah, definitely. I mean, this chart didn't even remotely look anything like what PT 21 and PT 22 tournaments looked like. But I think actually kind of maybe somewhat similar to what we have based on the results from this year. So let's maybe get into that.
so then we also had this slide, and this is the famous slide, and I updated it to have a couple of more people on there. So in addition to our friend Durden, this is the error settings must know, and it was, early years you could do 1 to 2, dead ball, rebirth, golden, and listed the starters and the amount of relievers. And I know this is basically have has had a lot of use in the community, and we're glad that I constantly refer to it. Stir, I don't know if you constantly refer to it, like, or do you have it memorized?
Um, yeah, I mean, I kind of, with with Durden had put it together based on my memory of what tournaments were from previous years. So I think I just kind of have it in my head now. But definitely when every new tournament, I think about essentially the numbers from this slide to kind of figure out my my plan of attack pitching wise. But a lot of people have reached out to us this year and said, well, is there anything similar for hitting? And my answer kind of had been, no, it's too complicated. There's too much involved that we can't really do that. But despite that, Exto has pretty much done that. So, um, it's nice to be able to have something that can go with the pitching to show you a little bit more of the overall environment, not just the the pitching.
So, uh, I spend a lot of time dumping data, probably more time than I should be. And so this is 32 different tournaments and a bunch of data. Um, Hopefully it's useful. This is basically what I wanted to kind of talk about it, and we're gonna kind of break it down and talk about some of the highlights. But yeah, this is K per nine, walks per nine, home run per nine, ERA, runs allowed per nine, FIP per nine, BABIP, WOBA, doubles per 600 plate appearances, triples per 600 plate appearances, stolen bases per 200, uh, fielding innings pitched, or no, the two innings pitched, so that it's based off the pitchers. Stolen base percentage, base running per 600 plate appearances, errors per 1400 innings pitched, and zone rating per 1400 innings or not innings pitched, innings played. Yeah. Uh, so, Astor, what would you like to look at first?
So I guess let's start with the left side. It's interesting to see strikeouts per nine. Obviously, if you're looking long enough lens, kind of almost a straight line up. There's been more and more strikeouts in the game, but one of the things that's interesting looking at this is, from the beginning of the game, they kind of had it set up where there was just kind of a baseline of 2.5 strikeouts per nine that, even going back to the extreme environment of 1876, that seemed to be the floor. Um, and and then it didn't really go up from that floor in when we got into the 20s and even 30s. But then there was kind of a bump up where it nearly doubled to like 5 or 6 strikeouts per nine, and then that stayed solid for a little while, and then it kind of went up to kind of more modern levels like 8 or 9, but then dropped back down to like 5 or 6 in like the in the 70s and 80s, and then started marching back up again, like we saw in real life, where strikeouts have just gone to insane levels the last few years. But we don't have any environments in the game that are 2000 18 19 when the numbers are just through the roof. We've asked Nico about having that in the future, and it's not something that they have available now. But hopefully, in future iterations of the game, we can get those run environments for tournaments, which should be pretty crazy. But it's just interesting to see how strikeouts started at that baseline level, and then of 2.5, and then they kind of go up slowly, and then just shoot way up, but then drop down and then jump right up to that same high level. Um, and it's kind of, I guess, the best way to think about this for the for the hitting numbers, the pitching numbers, is that what I use this data for is to kind of figure out what shape of cards I think are going to fit this format. So, if I look at a tournament that I don't have any particular data on because it's a new tournament, and I know that the baseline year is 1925, I have a pretty good idea based on the other tournaments from around then. We don't have anything from that particular year, but I can look from ones that are a couple years before, a couple years after, and kind of get a pretty good idea of, okay, this is what the strikeouts per nine is going to look like. This is what the walks per nine. This is the home runs per nine. That should give me a pretty good idea of what shape of pitcher is going to best fit this era. And then you can kind of do the same thing for hitters. You might need to look at a few other statistics, um, but that's really the benefit of having this data is you can kind of pretty quickly, without having to wait a few tournaments to get the very specific data of that particular tournament. You can kind of extrapolate from some of the tournaments that are near it and get an idea of what shape is likely to work. Only caveat I would mention to that is that there are a couple of kind of breakpoint years, like 1919 and 1921 don't look anything alike. There just seems to be a jump somewhere in there that the home runs goes from like 0.05 home runs per nine to zero point 0.5 home runs per nine. So it goes up 10 times just in that 2 year interval. And I don't think we've had anything specifically, 1920, um, but the jump 1919 to 1921, you can see it's even bigger than that. It's the jump to 0.65 or 0.75 home runs per nine. But yeah, it's like a 10 times jump. And so that really changes the kind of cards. I don't know that there's, I know, um, like I guess if you're looking at like 1968 or to 1971, um, is a similar pretty big change in in how the numbers look. So you do have to be a little bit wary of that, but I think in general, if you've got data from from a similar time period, that should be a good starting point of where to build from.
I think on top of that, that like I tried to capture at least in the card pool description, some of the numbers are obviously influenced by the cards that are available. So I think maybe that has something to do with it. Like I think we've had two versions of the Tuesday GDB, and I think they have different card pool limits or something like that.
Yeah, the 1955 tournament, I think, was initially open, and now the new version is gold cards or less. So that certainly can explain. Also, we have a lot less data for the newer version because it's only been around for a couple weeks. So it might, the numbers might get closer if we, once we have data on a few more tournaments, it definitely is interesting to see a much different, run environment in the two different 1955 tournaments. And probably the primary reason for that is just the caliber of the cards is different. And so, that is definitely a factor that can change things. So you don't want to be too precise in studying this data, and but it's just the idea is to kind of understand what the shape of the run environment is going to look like and how that impacts the shape of the cards.
Ludwig, I didn't have any 1919 non-live low decap daily. I didn't have enough. Or maybe I did. No, I started collecting that after I compiled this. Um, Another kind of anomaly, I would say, is 1930. Uh, for whatever reason, it's 1.75 home runs per nine. I double
Yeah,
checked the data.
1930 historically was a year that just the numbers were very different offensively than the time right before it or the time right after it. Um, and so I think that that's probably just a reflection of kind of, when they were, setting up the, in the engine that 1930 is kind of a unique year in history. And so my guess is that's primarily the influence of that.
I'm gonna double check about what isodifo is saying about the new one, because it could just be mislabeled. Because I was going off of Thursday. Oh, it is 1959. Okay, so that makes sense.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would help explain a little bit why um, there's a bit more variance. Because I didn't quite think the cards would be that big a factor, but um, okay,
Well, we're
make a
gonna
little
edit
less.
edit this live as is tradition. Uh, Unfortunately, I probably won't look at the other stuffs, but there we go. So now we have a 1959 GDB.
Okay.
Uh, so, um, yeah. Otherwise, you see kind of the spike, like you said, in the 1960s. K per nine goes down in the 1980s. Control, I guess. Um,
Yeah, it's interesting to see that the walks go kind of pretty much straight up until from like the early when there were none, um, in the 1876 tournament to to like the 1920s, and then it's kind of all over the place within that that range of 3 to almost 6. What's the tournament that has almost nearly 6 walks per nine?
6 walks per nine.
Looks like it's in the 40s.
That's the overnight under the covers.
Oh, right. Okay.
Lots of walks.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing, especially since, um, you're a lot of people have, at least a few perfect cards in there. Um, and if you have that, new Maddox or new Walter with 110, control, you wouldn't think the environment would push it that high, but that's amazing. Okay. That always
So
look at.
kind of tried to break it down. I don't know how much this is. I think runs allowed per nine is on the right graph, and then I was taking a look at BABIP and WOBA, and that's on the left. So the surprisingly, it looks like BABIP. Uh, it's almost like I should have probably expanded the range on the left to not go from zero, but uh, it kind of floats between, I guess, 0.256 and I think in 2010 in the modern era it's like 3.10, right?
Okay.
Yeah, 320 in modern. So you go from about looks like 271 in the tournament lab early years. Um, but it the BABIP seems, I guess, if you think about it, that's like 50 points,
Right.
which is fairly significant.
Yeah, but it's interesting that it kind of, goes up and then it kind of goes down again and then it goes up. Um, yeah, that's interesting.
I didn't really see um, runs allowed per nine. It seemed to match more WOBA, which kind of makes sense. Like higher
Sure.
WOBA, higher runs allowed. Um, yeah, okay, that kind of makes sense. Should have an inverse square correlation. So, Isidifo, are you saying that as WOBA increases, the run environment should decrease? Or you're saying you're explaining the left side where WOBA is lower but runs allowed is higher. Yeah, this is batting. This is batting WOBA. I was kind of using runs allowed per nine as a proxy for the pitching or for the run environment. Um, so yeah, in terms of WOBA, like these are all era adjusted WOBAs as well. So depending, um, it's using kind of the standard run expectancy 24 matrix values that was in the Tom Tango book, but it's adjusted by like the amount of singles, doubles, triples, home runs, walks, and what have you. So um, yeah, I think it's only really. I think it's because of the errors, because the runs allowed is not the ERA. I wonder if I would have plotted ERA and WOBA, it would have been together. Okay. So anything in terms of like BABIP or arrows or the run environment, like that. Comment again that like I was looking through this and 1930 pops out as an interesting one.
Yeah, I mean, I do really think that that's, primarily just, the nature of that particular year in MLB history. And so like the prior chart that we were looking at, was by decades. So it didn't really, the rest of the 30s wasn't like that, wasn't like 1930. And so it probably smoothed out that out a little bit. But it's just interesting to see for, um, certainly 1930s was a well, actually, I don't know what this chart, whether it was pulling the specific year, 1930, or if it pulled, from the whole decade, because we didn't create this chart, so I don't exactly know what it. Now that I think about it, what it, certainly the fact that it's 1930 on this chart is so extreme. It probably is just taking the first year of each decade to just kind of represent the decade. So that's why 1930, shows out on here. Whereas I don't think the rest of the 1930s was quite that extreme.
So in addition to this, kind of started looking at fielding, and this graph kind of got destroyed by the dead ball. Uh, um,
Yeah,
but you kind of have FIP on the right, which is the blue line, and basically as time goes on, FIP increases. Except again, I think 1970, I
right.
guess, is this point here, and you also have again the 1930. But like in general, I think you expect more walks, uh, home runs, and strikeouts.
Sure. But
The
it's
zone rating. Go ahead.
no, I was just gonna say it's interesting that the zone rating doesn't look to be that much of impacted by the era environment. That's interesting.
Yeah, there's everything is kind of neutral in terms of zone rating, and then like Tournament Lab was big, and 1933 PD historical is big, and 1993 might be something to do with perfect drafts.
Yeah, it's possible.
Even 1998 Tournament Lab. But yeah, it is kind of still like not a lot over an entire season,
Right.
because the 1400 fielding innings is about uh one person's or like a one season worth of fielding.
Yeah. So, and it's one of those things. In terms of if we're not looking at tournaments, really back at the very beginning, um, you know, how much you think defense matters is kind of a your overall approach to tournaments, whether it's modern era or 1940s, 1960s, 90s. I don't think you need to make adjustments to that, other than when we're talking about 1920 probably and earlier, where suddenly the defense just becomes um, much more important because the error rate is going to be significant. So I think that's important to kind of keep in mind. It's one thing that you just maybe don't need to make an adjustment on, which is nice because there are a lot of things that you do. Um, and then one of the things, the stolen base, success is interesting. That kind of for the most part, um, starts right around 50%, goes down a little bit, um, and then kind of bounces around, and then has slowly moves up. But it's still there's no point where it's particularly good, and you know it's interesting that just in the tournament environment in general, just people, even the best players, um, for that era don't necessarily produce all that well in terms of stolen base success. Um, and it's kind of a shame that it's a factor that's taken out of the game. It kind of prevents a certain style of team that I think kind of can work in league a little bit better, but you can't really build for that in really almost any of the historical tournaments, and probably not even really in the modern tournaments. To have a team that you're really trying to be aggressive on the base paths, because the success rates are so low. But then when you look, to some of the like 1930s, 1940s, it's just awful. Where guys are it's close to 40%. It looks like there's one year where it goes even below 40%. Although it's also unsung heroes where the cards were just in general and terrible. Although the catchers were pretty terrible for that card pool as well. Um,
The iron historical is at 12. Uh, what else? The low iron is at 11.
oh, in terms
Uh,
of attempts,
yeah.
yeah, it's interesting that definitely I think the probably the weaker card pools are going to be the lower. Makes sense that that would be the lower tier card pools are going to be the ones that really guys aren't even trying, because there's just no, even if you're not really adjusting your settings, there's probably just not enough guys that you're pushing to run in those tournaments.
So,
Um,
so I know we've talked about this in the past, and if anyone wants to chime in, go ahead. But it's almost we've always talked about kind of normalization and with respect to the player pool and the league totals and the modifiers for within a tournament, but it's always kind of seemed that um, stealing and base running has been um, like it doesn't get normalized, and maybe this is really evidence of that, because if you have such a weak card pool with lower, like, I wonder if you put a team of like 100 speed, 110 stealing into any of these errors, like would we actually get the 25 to 30 stolen base attempts per season and a
hmm.
higher stolen base rate? Like, this could be just more of a factor of the cards available. I'd be kind of curious to kind of go into one of these and see, like, this, find the fastest card and see how many stolen bases that card actually has.
Sure. I mean, the tough thing with that is you'd almost need to be a card that most people don't play, and then you just you know jack up the stolen um uh jack up the stolen base attempts for that one player, and then just have that player kind of stand out in the data. Because otherwise, I mean, you don't know, even if people are playing that card, if they're not, increasing the stolen base attempts for that particular player, if they've just got it at neutral because they don't really adjust their settings, I don't know how much you're going to get from that. But maybe not. Maybe I guess it'd be interesting to see, if without any like prompting, based on adjusting the sliders, whether a guy like that gets a lot of steals. So that might be something we dig into.
Yeah, I think it's definitely like maybe in one of these ones where as I prepare for Dead Ball Jamboree in a couple of hours, like it actually has a high amount, but I think that's because you do have like cards like Billy Hamilton and stuff, right? Or is it a
Yeah,
cap?
I mean, they're definitely that is a pool that has Oscar Charleston. Oh no, not Oscar Charleston. Uh, yeah, the new Tris Speaker card. Yeah, there's a good amount of speedsters in that format. At least the cards look like they would be. Um, but yeah, I don't think that there's just much high iron, low gold. Oh, that was the tournament that's now high iron silver. I guess was high iron gold. Um, but I don't know. That wasn't a. I think that was a modern era tournament. So that at least helps a little bit in terms of trying to do a speed team. But yeah, I think everything would have to kind of be right this year to make speed kind of be a net positive.
Yeah, and it kind of makes sense that like you're saying the weaker card pools like the Iron Historical and well, I guess the Daily Gold Historical cap is a little odd with its 12. Oh no, that's Friday so no, that's the Daily Gold Historical cap. And the Friday Silver like low iron because I think you just don't get enough points into speed and stealing at those overalls.
Right. Yeah, I mean cap tournaments. I think that the obviously generally speaking, the more you spend in terms of cap points on a card, the better quality of the ratings. And so if you're looking to build a speed team in a cap tournament, you're going to have to essentially spend cap points towards the speed. And I think you're always going to be much better off in most of these environments to put those cap rating points towards power or or other categories. Um, and so that might be the biggest factor in why especially in the lower level caps is that people aren't spending points on on speedsters, um, and so you're just seeing a lot of plotters kind of making up those teams.
And even then, like I think people are just very conservative with their stolen bases. In additional, do sliders matter? Good question. Um, it in cap tournaments, every out is probably more worthwhile. I would say, right? Like that makes sense, right?
Every out is more. Yeah, I think I agree. You don't have you have less than in an open environment. You have less opportunities to to score runs. And the big thing is it's kind of tricky because a lot of times your lineup is top heavy, and so you're really trying to get most of your runs from the top of your lineup. And especially losing an out when you've got the top of the lineup in there, um, is even more devastating.
Yeah, and I think you can make arguments about sack bunting and like suicide squeeze and stuff, and I'm sure people are doing it and very successful at it, but yeah, I think this is what makes something like this kind of really, really thought provoking. I would say.
Yeah, no, I mean, one of the things I like about this chart is there's some stuff that it's just kind of like a, quick reference. If we get a new, next time we get a refresh, we can kind of look at this and say, hey, I think, a 19, 51 tournament that we haven't had that particular year, but we have tournaments right around it that look pretty similar. We can have a pretty good idea of the shape, but also some of this stuff is just kind of giving me ideas of like, hey, I want to look into that because that seems anomalous, or that seems like you know um, maybe a break point to look for in the future. So I do like this as both kind of a good reference tool, but also a jumping off point for us to maybe do some further research, or maybe for some other people to take a look and see if they can kind of come up with answers, and for why some of the odd numbers are the way they are, and that might help in kind of thinking about roster building for the future.
Yeah, 100%. And even then, if you look at the stolen bases, I think it's like 70 or 80 is like the break even point in at least modern. Like I remember that in the book. Like
Yeah,
if it so like
yeah,
none of these are as
yeah. Nobody, no era is even close. Now, to a certain extent, it's an individual player thing, that uh, So really, it's the most stolen bases come from the very best players, because the guys who are slow just don't even try. Um, but with the AI, sometimes it seems like the AI just picks moments at random to have a guy who doesn't look like they're particularly good at stealing to give it a try, unless you have stealing completely off. um, and so, to the extent that I agree, people probably, given the fact that there's so many different daily and weekly tournaments that you're playing, you may not be adjusting your sliders, for each one, and um, uh, yeah, I think I that would be my guess.
yeah. So the other graph I have is kind of the extra base hits, and so again, this is kind of plotting doubles and triples per 600 plate appearances, and some of them is kind of like triples being doubles plus speed, I guess. So again, I kind of think that this is kind of a like a card pool. But I think like this influences your defensive decisions as well. Um, I'd imagine that it looks like they're sometimes the second base totals, double totals make sense, and sometimes they don't.
Yeah, but that's interesting that I didn't quite imagine that there'd be that big of a spread between the to go from 18 to 41 in terms of the number of stolen bases per 600. I just, in my mind, I never really thought about it changing that much, and given that, I do think that it may be something to factor in a little bit more. That Yeah, there might be tournaments where you do want to kind of pay significantly more attention to gap, and it looks like these 1930s tournaments are the play, and even some of the earlier ones are the ones to start really thinking about that. um Actually, is that under 14? What tournament is that?
Yeah, it's
Oh, the
Tuesday.
new 1959 tournament. Wow.
The
Well, we
the
also don't have a ton of data on that one, so
yeah.
um that might be something to kind of monitor as we get more data.
Yeah, as the card pool kind of evolves and people start playing kind of a more optimized build, I'm sure these numbers will get kind of higher. Um, but yeah, I guess like you would want with more doubles. I'm guessing gap plays more up.
Right. I would think so. I mean, who knows given the engine, but that would be the kind of
or Or is
logic.
it like the K per nine where like stuff doesn't matter as much because there's a floor? So like for something like the Friday Silver, which again we don't have a lot of data on. But again, it could be a card pool problem where it's not like you want to lean more into gap, but it's just like those gap cards are the best cards.
I mean, the yeah, and by the time you get to silver, I do feel like there are some, pretty noteworthy cards that have really high gap. So it's not like everybody's just at, a semi low level, and then some guys are pretty decent. There's actually some like pretty high, um, and I don't know, given the run environment, whether I guess, you may want to look at some cards that, like for specifically for 1927 silver, home runs are pretty darn low at 0.48, and so, you know, looking for those cards that are, low power but high gap, might be a good place to, to invest, in the cards that fit that profile, to match that. But that's something I haven't looked into a whole lot. I haven't really thought about silver much since they, adjusted it. Just I've had limited bandwidth to think about, making adjustments to rosters. So um,
Yeah,
yeah, that might be something to look into.
I think overall it's kind of interesting because this is not necessarily predictive, but it's like it's always it's backwards looking, right?
Sure.
So like and this is basically what my model is trying to do is like trying to take components of this and predict how new cards are going to play in it. But what like this data, this is all from the observed, and so this is just like it's a function of the cards that were being played at the time. So I took this, yeah. So this has been basically since the engine update in June, May. When was the engine update?
I think it was in June, but I'm not exactly sure.
May 24th
Okay.
was when the changes happened, I guess. But so yeah, so it's been 7 months of worth of data and 7 months worth of cards being updated, and so I'm sure if we like bring back some of these tournaments that were played back in May, June, July, August with cards we have now in December, uh, I'm sure the numbers are going to shift. But I think in
Yeah.
general, like you know,
That's why I kind of said before is you kind of want to look at this, just kind of in general to kind of get a feel for shape. But I think there's a lot of factors that it would be impossible for us to kind of smooth out. Um, and just it would make it less relevant, like if we were only looking at like open formats, there just wouldn't be that many that we could really compare with, over the time periods. So we kind of have to look at everything, and then it just means we have to recognize the limitations, and just use it as kind of a general sense of what the shape is going to look like.
so yeah, so that's everything I have. We can talk about ultimate base running. Um, it's always negative, which I don't know what that means.
Yeah,
Is
I
that
I don't I don't either. I'm not even sure I really understand what UBR is supposed to capture, so I don't think I could talk intelligently about that. But yeah, when I looked at this chart for the first time, I was like, it's negative in every era. That's really weird. Okay,
oh, except for modern in the Sunday Open,
okay.
it's 0.27, which again is maybe it's a card issue, like a card pool.
I don't know. That's pretty strange.
So yeah, uh any of the people in chat, any questions or anything? Does this seem useful? I spent like the afternoon on Sunday compiling this. Oh, okay. Isidifo, I might ask you what that means or what you mean by that, but um, I kind of have an idea, but yeah. So yeah, I hope this has been helpful. Um, Figure the fruits of my labor for the and Aster's labor and Durden's labor for the past 7 months. Figured it would be our Saturnalia gift to you.
Well, if nothing else, I will say I thank you for compiling everything because it really is very cool to see the all of the data together from all these different tournaments and um, now that we have it, for I guess we may get one or two more refreshes before the end of the cycle. I definitely think it'll be helpful, um, and kind of to make adjustments before we have any real data. Um,
Yeah, for sure.
and also just and kind of how things change over time is kind of fun as well. Um, cool, yeah, and just kind of as a general thing, if there's anything that you maybe want us to dig deeper into, or um, any particular tournaments that you want us to kind of break down, going forward, the next couple weeks, both Exto and I are going to be traveling, so I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do a stream, um, you know, in the next couple of weeks. But in the new year, probably, we'll be doing a few more of these, and we're always happy to to take suggestions on topics and cover some either concepts or tournaments or strategies that you just want us to dig deeper into. We're happy to do that.
Yeah, if you have any questions or anything, feel free to DM us. How it how have you been liking Tournament Lab? Would appreciate any feedback you have for that. What would you like to see in the next Tournament Lab? What what kind of tournament is so weird that you'd love to see it within constraints?
Sure.
So
Okay. Well, I probably a good spot to call it a night. So wanted to wish everybody a happy holidays, and we will probably talk to you sometime at the beginning of the new year.
yeah, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Merry Kwanzaa, Happy Holidays, Happy Saturnalia, Happy New Year, and yeah, let's raid Tranquil Hill Farms.
Sounds good.
Bye.